Hey everyone, welcome back to Linux for Everyone and welcome home. This is the show about desktop Linux, open source software, and the people creating and enjoying it. And episode 30 is a dense, informative, and just fascinating one because my special guest is none other than Alan Pope of Canonical, aka Popey. And Alan did not shy away from the tough questions. He actually encouraged me to ask him the tough questions, and I know that you guys submitted a few as well. I tried to sneak in as many of those as possible. The end result here was just incredible. It was more than an hour of really stimulating conversation, and if you want even more than that, you can become a patron of Linux for Everyone starting at $2 a month. Every single patron of the show right now has access to the unedited interview, which is 96 minutes. You'll also get a monthly patron-exclusive live chat with me, early access to most of the videos that I put up on the YouTube channel, and early access to this show. If that sounds interesting to you, head over to patreon.com/Linux4Everyone, and thank you for all of your support, guys. So let's just jump straight into the conversation with Alan because this episode is all killer, no filler. It's all Popey all the time. Let's go.
हेलो दोस्तों, मैं हूं देव और हम सब सुन रहे हैं लिनक्स फॉर एवरीवन यहाँ भारत में। वेलकम होम।
Well, this is a long overdue pleasure. I'm sorry it took this long, but
cool.
it's really good to be finally talking to you. Do you want to introduce yourself? I mean, I know that probably 3 people who are listening to this may not know who you are, but just for those 3 people.
I don't like to elevate my status. I'm just some guy on the internet who happens to work for Canonical, and I've worked on Ubuntu for a while now, been around in the community and got hired to work at Canonical. And since 2011, that's what I've been doing. So
2011, so 9 years.
Yeah.
9 years. And Ubuntu's been around how long?
15.
15 years.
Yeah,
okay.
Since 2004. I think the apocryphal story is that Mark Shuttleworth came up with the idea for Ubuntu while he was on a ship heading to Antarctica or something. I don't know.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So I guess your official title is Snap Advocate, right?
Developer advocate, I think.
Developer advocate.
Yeah.
Okay. But you do a lot more than just talking about snaps and getting the word out, right? I mean, what is kind of, if there is one, what's a typical day in Alan Pope's life at Canonical? Or is there a typical day?
So I feed the cat, take the kids to school, and not necessarily in that order. And then I grab myself a coffee, walk upstairs into my glorious office and start work. And I've learned over the years to partition my day up because it's very easy to get distracted by forum threads, Telegram, mailing lists, drama, yes, and all kinds of stuff. So I try and carve my day up. Often in the afternoon, there are a few meetings because the Americans wake up. But in the morning, it's usually mostly to myself. And that may be writing blog posts, making videos, updating documentation, answering support questions. It could be anything. But I try and carve the day up in such a way that I have blocks of time that I can dedicate to doing particular things. So I've been around in the Ubuntu community for long enough that it's not just about the job that I do during the day. I often spend a bit of time in the evenings hacking on stuff and communicating with the community. So in a previous role, my job title was community manager, and I still kind of have that in the back of my head. I still do some of that in my spare time because, as I see it, there are people in the community who are contributing to open source outside of their day job. And while some would say it's good for you at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock to put down your tools and go and spend time with the family, I'm terrible at that. And I quite enjoy engaging with people who are contributing in the community because they're giving up their spare time So I don't think it's unreasonable that I give up some of mine.
And in a way, I mean, it helps you kind of empathize with those other developers, right, who are doing this in their spare time. And you can kind of get a closer connection with how they operate and how they feel about what they're doing, right?
Yeah. And when I started working at Canonical, I was already a community contributor. So I was already someone who was giving the most valuable thing we have, which is the time we have on planet Earth. I'm now being paid to do it during the day, which is great. But equally, I still feel like I could contribute more outside of work. And so I do in between, running the kids around and, the usual kind of stuff, making dinner for the family.
Since I started this whole crazy Linux journey of mine a couple years ago, I've always kind of seen you as almost a spokesperson for Ubuntu and Canonical, and not necessarily as the, developer advocate, snap advocate, community manager, but more of someone who speaks and represents Canonical, even if it's not in an official capacity. Yeah,
I think that's a byproduct of being my past role in the community team. We used to have a really significantly sized community team. There was like 6 or 7 of us. And that reduced over time in 2017, when the company size was reduced. That was a difficult time. But some of that stuff still needs to be done. And you still need to engage with people. But also, I love it. I love hanging around in Telegram channels and answering people's technical support questions and sitting on IRC. And, I love doing it.
I'm always just floored by how active these Telegram channels are constantly, day and night, every minute of the day. We had one guy, it was Rob. He stepped away for about a month because he was really working vigorously on a new project, and he came back and he's like, "Oh, 30,000 unread messages."
Ain't nobody got time for that.
No big deal. But yeah, it's just such a vibrant community in places like that. And you know what? Is it like that in IRC? Because I've never touched IRC.
It used to be a bit like that. The world is split into 2 kinds of people on IRC. Those who launch their IRC client, use IRC, and then close the client. And then as soon as they close the client, it's like you hiding behind a blanket in front of a baby. Like, as soon as you can't see it, it's not there anymore, right? And then the other type of IRC user is the type that stays connected all the time. And so they leave a client or a bouncer running somewhere. And that's very much like Telegram. It's always there. And when you open the client, you've got this backlog of stuff to read. And I was one of those on IRC. And I have a client always connected. So if someone pings me in the middle of the night, I'll see it in the morning. But a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people prefer to stay disconnected. And I think those kind of people don't like Telegram. So I think you're either one of those 2 types of people.
I started out as one of those types, and I felt so invested in like catching up every morning and seeing what the conversations were. But in the end, I'm spending an hour and a half catching up, and you just have to jump in there when you feel like you have a moment, or someone tags you and you something you feel like answering. But yeah, it's insane how many platforms we're accessible to people on now.
I consider it very much like going to the pub. When I'm not at the pub with my friends and my friends are there, I don't have any expectation of knowing what they talked about while I'm not there. I don't have any expectation that there would be a record of the conversation that I could catch up on. And so if I'm late to the pub, I don't expect to like sit there for 30 minutes catching up with all the conversations that happened before I got there. And
I should probably adopt that attitude.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way.
I want to ask you, before we get into the tough questions, Alan, I want to ask you some community questions that the people contributed. From Alex, what is your go-to drink when waking up?
The short answer is always coffee, first thing in the morning.
Yes.
But I am a heathen. I'm not a coffee snob. So I'm fine drinking instant. I don't have to have like cold pressed or French press or anything like that. You just like,
as long as it's caffeinated and
so long as there's hot water in it, then I'll drink it.
I will, in a pinch, drink Nescafe and be happy with it. I will admit that on camera. So
I guess I just have, my taste is just shockingly terrible, but there you go.
Reuben or club sandwich?
What's a Reuben? I don't even know what a Reuben is.
I don't know what a Reuben is. Hold on. It's an American grilled sandwich composed of corned beef, Swiss cheese, sauerkraut, and Russian dressing with rye bread.
That
sounds really good.
I don't think I've ever had a Reuben. I've certainly had club sandwiches, mostly in hotels when I can't be bothered to leave the room and I just send me up a club sandwich and a beer.
This is from Olsey. What is your favorite tech, new or old?
Well, I've got I would probably say ThinkPads, because I look around the room and I can see half a dozen of them. So that's got to be the answer to that question.
Gotcha.
I have a number of ThinkPads and I collect them, and I obsessively scour eBay for old ThinkPads to play with.
It's the older models that you're more drawn to?
Actually, I like a nice spread. In fact, although the newest one I have is from 2015. So, yeah, the short answer is yeah.
Okay.
Anything from 2015 older. And most of them run either XP or Windows 98 or Windows 95. They're really quite old and crusty. And, yeah, I have quite a nice little collection.
So, like, if I were to ask you, what is your favorite form factor, your favorite laptop to run Ubuntu on as your daily driver?
So, I would say the X series ThinkPads. So X220 was the previous laptop I had from this, which is actually sat just there. And the X220 was the last one that had the traditional ThinkPad keyboard before they moved to chiclet with the 230. It's getting a bit long in the tooth now. The X220 has a Sandy Bridge CPU, only supports 16 gig of RAM, which is still, quite a lot. Yeah. But you could put 2 SSDs in it. Some people have done hardware mods to upgrade the display to 1080p because most of them come with 1366 by 768.
I think my brother-in-law actually did that with an old ThinkPad, and he was he just said it felt brand new after that. He replaced the battery, replaced the drives, replaced the display.
I need to do that to mine.
All right, so let's talk about snaps. Because there are some elephants in the room that maybe we can get under control and get some clarity about. And I know that Ubuntu, it seems like, always has kind of a big target painted on its back. It's the easy distro to pick on. And I think that based on some of the questions I received for you, there might be some misconceptions or just some misunderstandings.
That's possible. It's also possible people just don't like us. And it's also possible people think based on past actions, things we've done in the past, that people think we're going to do similar things in the future. So, I think it's always good to clarify those things for sure. Fire away.
I'll sum up most of these by asking, why is the Snap store not open source?
That's a good question. I don't have a definitive answer, but I know we've previously developed things that have not been open source, like Launchpad. And there were calls from the community. Launchpad for a long time it's the code hosting platform, the bug tracker, and everything for Ubuntu. And there were calls from the community to open source it. And why is this thing not open source? And people could run their own instance of Launchpad. And we open sourced it. It was a lot of work, but it was open sourced, and it still is, and it's maintained as an open source project. And as far as I'm aware, there are 0 other instances of Launchpad existing in the world. Like, we went through a lot of effort to open source the thing, and nobody actually uses it. Now, you can come up with reasons why that's the case, and partly because back in the old days, it supported Bazaar, BZR, as the revision control system and not Git. It now has support for Git, but it's a bit too late because by then GitHub, GitLab, and loads of others had already overtaken Launchpad in terms of number of users, mind share, usability, in every way. So maybe we open sourced it too late, maybe. And there's a similar thing with the Snap Store is even if we open sourced it, would people actually run instances of the Snap Store? And I realize that's only one argument, and some I can hear some people shouting into their podcast players right now, that's not the point. You should just open source it anyway. You should just make everything open source anyway. But there's a lot of work for us to do in order to maintain that open source project. And I think the benefits aren't significant enough to make it worth open sourcing. There are other parts to this story. The Snap Store is very tightly integrated with Launchpad. So when you submit applications, there are things that happen inside Launchpad. And so it's very closely tied to Launchpad. So if you did want to stand up the whole thing, you would probably want to stand up Snap Store and Launchpad at the same time. And that's a big beast. Launchpad is a monstrous beast to run. It is possible to run it on a single laptop, I think, but you have to have a big laptop and it wouldn't run very well. And then further to that, part of the reason why we wanted to have a centralized store is because we've had experience of having lots of diverse repositories. And one of the problems that the Snap Store is trying to solve is the problem of discoverability. Users want to get the latest and greatest, freshest software, and users don't tend to go grubbing around in GitHub releases pages or some download page on a website somewhere in order to get software. They want to open an app store just like they do on a phone, find the icon for the thing they want, click on the icon and it to install. And we really want lots of people to use this thing. So we want to appeal to lots of people. And I know I can anticipate the further shouting at the podcast players is, but Flatpak have this and they have multiple repositories. My point is that actually replicates the PPA system that we had that wasn't successful. And PPAs are not discoverable. Like if you wanted to install the latest NVIDIA driver or latest version of Golang or Rust or something, if there was a PPA for that thing, how would you know that? There's no way it's exposed on your laptop. There's no way as a developer you would know that that's the place to go and get that software. Whereas when you have a central app store, you can just search, find it, install it. And I think the way, I'm not criticizing Flatpak, but when people draw the conclusion, the comparison between Snaps and Flatpaks and say, well, Flatpak has this, they're going down the road of having multiple repositories exactly as we did with PPAs. And that's exactly what we learned and we want to get away from. So that's partly why it's centralized. Maybe in the future it will be open sourced. When there's time in the day to get that done, maybe it will be. I don't know.
Personally, I will be happy when there is no more reliance on PPAs. Even if we're talking about the bleeding edge graphics drivers, not having to add those 2 or 3 different PPAs, for example, that I don't know what they're called. Paolo Diaz PPA for the Radeon Mesa drivers and that kind of stuff, right? I mean, if it's just, and you guys are definitely taking a steady march towards making all of those pain points go away. How popular do you think PPAs are?
It's interesting. I asked for some statistics recently from our IS people, and they don't give me anything other than number of hits over a period of time on a PPA. I can't get any detail about where those people are, who they are, or anything like that. All I know is relatively which are the most popular PPAs. And interestingly, there are a large number of people who have a PPA, and I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but there is a PPA in Launchpad that is more popular in terms of number of people who hit it every day. And that PPA is empty. It has nothing in it. But it's because people read documents and blog posts and instructions that say, this is how you get that thing. You add this PPA. And so people just blindly do it, right? And so there are people out there who will blindly follow instructions. Even if they are patently wrong, they will still do it. And so the number one most hit PPA is not providing any value to any user at all because it doesn't have anything.
It literally has no software.
There are no packages in it. It used to, but it doesn't anymore.
So it's some kind of popular
some clever people
problem
could probably yes, it's a problem that people wanted solving, and somebody solved it by creating a PPA, but subsequently deleted the stuff from that PPA.
Right, and now none of those guides have been updated, and none of those forum posts have been updated, and
none of those users probably even know that PPA is empty, and they probably don't even know that they're no longer getting updates for that piece of software. But that was their choice. They added that PPA to their system.
That is a good argument against using PPAs, really.
You're at the behest of the person who created the PPA. To give an example, I followed instructions on my own laptop a little while ago to install GNOME Builder. And I followed the upstream instructions, which were add this Flatpak repository and Flatpak install GNOME Builder. And I did that, and I had GNOME Builder. And I didn't use it for a while, and I went to update, and it failed. And it failed because that Flatpak repository's gone away. And so I'm now left with an orphaned copy. And this is why I say Flatpak is going down the same path that PPAs did, and it's not necessarily the panacea that people think it is to have lots of repositories all over the place. And in fact, the people who are creating Flatpaks have coalesced around FlatHub. They're centralizing all their applications in FlatHub. The vast majority are in that one repository. So I don't buy that argument that having lots of separate repositories is a good idea.
Is there any truth to the belief that I see you smiling, you getting excited?
Oh, I know what's coming. Don't worry. I know the question you're going to ask.
Do you? Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any truth to the belief that Flatpak is getting more support from distros and from the community than snaps are?
It depends how you measure things, right? What is your measure of success? Do you measure success by number of people who have published applications in that format? Or do you measure it by number of users who are installing things that are packaged in that format? Do you only measure it by high profile developers? Does it matter to you that a developer that has an application that has one user, where do you place your relative weighting on success, right? Oh, also, how many distros have support for that feature, right? And depending upon which one you pick, statistics, what is it, 80% of statistics are made up on the spot. Depending upon which one you pick, you could land on either side. I'll give you this as a marker. For every application which is published in FlatHub and published in the Snap Store, there are around 10 times more people installing the Snap than there are installing the Flatpak. And there are more than 10 times more applications in the Snap Store than there are in FlatHub. Now that's my measure of, we're doing okay. Someone else's measure of okay is there are more distributions out there which have Flatpak support built into their app store. Okay. And that may be considered their success metric, right? Because, Pop! OS has Flatpak support, Mint has Flatpak support, and a couple of others have Flatpak support. But if you look at the metrics, you could do this yourself. Go to snapgraph.io/core, C-O-R-E. And core is like a small package, a runtime. You can think of it, equate it to kind of like the Flatpak runtimes. And on the right-hand side, down the bottom of the web page, there is a logarithmic scale showing all the distributions that have that Snap installed. So all of these distributions have at least one Snap installed on them. And you can see that list of distributions is incredibly long. So while you could argue, Snap support isn't baked into all these distributions, people are still going out of their way to add Snap support in order to get applications on those systems. So people do want this thing, even if it's not baked into the distro. And that, to me, is a measure of success. If people are going to go out of their way to install Snap support on Red Hat Linux, then we're doing something right. One thing I would say, whenever we're talking to software developers about packaging their stuff as a Snap, we never, ever talk down the other options. The other options are there. You could build an app image, you could build a Flatpak, you could build a Deb. We talk about the benefits you can get from having something as a Snap. But if someone wants to build something as a Flatpak or a Deb or an app image, go right ahead. We're not trying to get people in exclusivity agreements. We're not like Epic or anything like that.
Right.
We want the applications to be surfaced to users, because the ultimate goal of this is getting software in front of users and making it easy for users to discover new software. That's the whole point of this thing.
I'm not a developer of any kind. I know very little about the technicalities of this kind of stuff. And I think it might be interesting to hear what kind of work goes into packaging up a piece of software for a Snap and for a Flatpak. Is it any kind of increased load on the software developer to say, okay, I'm going to make both a Snap and a Flatpak?
It's very difficult for me to answer for a Flatpak because I've never made one. So I honestly don't know what the process is there. I know that if you are making from scratch, from whole cloth, you're making a brand new GTK GNOME application, and you use a tool like GNOME Builder, which is does an awful lot of the work for you, then I imagine it's pretty straightforward. If you are a developer of an application that's not written in GTK, that already pre-existed, and you want to create a Flatpak, I imagine there's documentation. I imagine it's not that painful because, plenty of people have done it. I don't know. But for snaps, I can certainly say that making a snap it depends on the application. In some cases, a snap just contains the deb. And an app developer who's already making a deb can just consume the deb and put it inside a snap and they're done. In some cases, that works. In other cases, they build it from source, and they compile their application from source, and then the results of that goes into the snap. We have a ton of documentation. We could certainly improve that documentation. We get feedback from people saying, I tried to snap this thing and it was hard. We have a community forum where we try and help people, get over the line. But there are thousands of snaps in the Snap Store, and so we must be doing something right. It can't be that hard if there are thousands of them in there. I will sometimes, on a Friday night, go and stumble across new pieces of software, and because I'm, bored and I don't really want to watch what my wife is watching on telly, I'll start making a snap of something, and I can often turn a snap around in an hour, let's say. So you go from having never seen this piece of software before into having a snap published in the store and available for people to download within 1 hour.
Give us some examples of what you've done there.
Open Spades was one. That was one. I've honestly lost count. There's quite a lot. So I that's not a humble brag, but I couldn't, there are quite a lot. The LBRY, the video platform, I made a snap out of that because I noticed someone was asking, and that was pretty straightforward. That one literally just takes the deb and injects it into the snap. And that makes it, you might think, well, that's cheating. Yeah, that's not packaging software. That's repackaging software. And it is. But if you can make the barrier to entry for someone so low that they're already making a deb and all they've got to do is just put an extra step on the end of the chain at the end of their release process that just takes that deb and puts it in another package and pushes it to the store, and they might get more users as a result, then everyone's a winner.
That's the end goal, right? It's the developers getting more users. It is users having access to more software.
Part of my job, you asked right at the beginning, what does my job entail? A lot of it is talking to developers and saying, hey, you should make a snap of your thing because your download is buried somewhere on your downloads page. We can help make it more discoverable by putting it in the Snap Store. And I'll have a conversation with them, and it might be over email. I might have a hangout with them. Sometimes it's just a couple of mails bounced backwards and forwards. And then 2 days later, I see that their application suddenly appears in the Snap Store. I had that last week. I emailed half a dozen people and said, hey, did you know you could just put that in the Snap Store? Here are the steps. And there's just 3 steps. Register in the store, register the name, upload your snap. You're done. The thing is in the store now. And the thing that pushes me is, people often say, oh, there's no apps on Linux, or, all the apps are rubbish. And that's completely not true. There's tons of applications out there. There's tons of great applications out there, and there are developers making software, but you just don't know about it because it's buried somewhere on a weird download page that you've never seen. And if we can take that software and put it in the storefront right in front of you, then it benefits you because you're exposed to this new software on Linux, and it benefits the developer because they get more users.
My wife, when she first tried Ubuntu for the first time in, 9-10 years, she was floored by the fact that she could just open up the software center and install Spotify. Because the first thing she did was what? She went to Spotify.com, and guess what Spotify told her? Sorry, this isn't available in your country. And then she went to the Snap Store. Boom. Done. It's those kind of stories that make it, I think, a very compelling platform.
And I get it that there are people who, Linux software purists who don't like change, for want of a better word, and dislike certain features about the Snap Store. And I'm sure you've got other questions coming up with, specifics, and that's fine. I'm happy to answer those. But we're really targeting those users who didn't realize they could install Discord on Linux, or didn't realize that there was an app that let them, edit drawings and stuff like that. We want to expose that stuff to users. And that App Store model is very powerful. We update the apps that are shown in GNOME software on a regular basis. And when we put something in that list, people do install it. Like, a lot of Linux nerds will tell you, oh, I just use apt on the command line, or I only use Pacman to install software. That's not normal, right? Normal people don't do that. Normal people open an app store, browse around, click on the games category, scroll around a little bit, read the description and go, that looks nice, click it and install it.
Yeah,
That's what normal people do.
You love doing all that via the command line, more power to you. You have that option. I think that's terrific.
Right.
But,
and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with having total control over your system, but don't be under the misapprehension that everybody does it like that.
I got a question here, and I don't actually know if this is true or not. I haven't really done any comparisons. Why do snaps load slower than apt or deb packages on the first run?
So snaps are confined applications predominantly, and they're delivered as a compressed file. So when you click the install button, you download a compressed file, a bit like a zip file. It's called SquashFS, and it stays compressed on your hard disk. It doesn't get unpacked on the drive. And a byproduct of those two things is there's a little overhead on opening files that are inside that compressed format. For some applications, that overhead is worse than others. So a very small application, like a little command line utility, actually isn't slower as a snap. And snap in general isn't slower than Debs. You could put them side by side, and in general, they're the same speed. But there are certain classes of applications that a lot of your listeners will be running, desktop applications, where there is a marked difference. And part of the reason is the overhead of that decompression. And part of it is because the application is confined, on first launch, Snap has to do some shenanigans in order to make that application see the world in the way that it expects to. Because when an application is confined, it has like a restricted view of the world, and it has a fake view of the world. When you launch a graphical application, it needs to have things like font caches and icon caches, and it expects files to be in particular places. And we have to set up that structure on first launch. And that's part of the reason why some desktop applications on first launch are a bit slow, is because they have to set up that infrastructure. Subsequent launches should be faster. Now, we are working hard on solving this. We have identified 3 or 4 pain points, and we are working very hard on this so that it will be less noticeable between snaps and apps. But yeah, it's a known problem, and it is frustrating for users. I completely get it.
I wanted to circle back actually to the conversations you have with developers about packaging things up into a snap. Anyone that ends up doing that, that's obviously a success story to you guys. But are there any big personal success stories that you have there with any well-known software publishers?
So we often have Snapcraft summits, and a Snapcraft summit is where a bunch of us get together in a location, and we invite software developers to come along. And a year or so ago, we had one in Seattle, and we had people there from Microsoft. We had someone there from Plex, and we had people from a whole bunch of software developers, like high-profile software developers you've heard of. And part of the reason for doing that is to get them over the line, get them in the store. And part of the reason for doing that is to understand pain points so that we can, like, the whole point of being a developer advocate is partly to promote the product and talk up the product, but part of it is to feed back from external developers to our internal teams and let them know, hey, this is a problem, this doesn't work, we need to fix this in order to solve this problem. There's been a whole bunch of those over the years. There's one which is very high profile, and it took us a year from having the first conversation with them to it actually landing in the store. And that entire year, we had a number of meetings with them. We had to go through legal conversations with them. We provided them with the terms and conditions of the store, and they have to run it past their legal team because they're a high-profile brand, and they can't just submit their application any old where. They have to run it past their legal team and make sure that we're compliant. And that took some time. And I think that's the hidden stuff under the covers that people don't realize. It's not just a case of, phone up a developer and say, hey, you should put it in the Snap Store. Okay, thanks, bye, and then slam the phone down. It's a nurturing conversation that goes on over a long period of time. And for one of those, I won't tell you which one it was, but it was over a year from start to finish to them getting in the store. And now that application has hundreds of thousands of people installing it and running it on a regular basis.
Man, I wish I knew what it was.
It took a year. I mean, you could see all the high profile ones that we've got in the store, and some of those took a long time, and some of them were pretty quick, and you just contact them and they go, yeah, okay. But for the ones that have corporate backing from a significant size software vendor, it's not as straightforward as that. And it takes a lot of work.
Do you have any follow-up conversations after they've been in the Snap Store for a while? Are they contacting you and giving you like any kind of gauge on whether they're pleased or not about the Snap's performance, or about, maybe a new audience or anything like that?
Yeah, totally. Sometimes we'll report when stuff is broken. So, if a user tells us, hey, that Snap doesn't work anymore, we have a hotline, if you like, directly to the developer who manages
the release.
Yeah, exactly. We pick up the bat phone and contact the developer, and they're usually pretty responsive. We had one occasion where a Snap wasn't being updated in the Snap Store, and the internet went into meltdown about, it's, they don't care about it anymore. See, Snap's falling apart because one developer hadn't updated their Snap. And it turns out the developer who was responsible for that was just on holiday, and they hadn't automated the process, and somebody else had released a new version, and they hadn't, he didn't realize they were going to release a new version while he was on holiday. And it's like, okay, there's improvements to the process there. You could automate things and move the labor around the company. So it's not just one guy's responsibility. There's things you could do to fix that. But the internet goes into meltdown and tries to come up with conspiracy theories as to why stuff happens. But it's great when you talk to the developers. We all get a little bit tired of this stuff because often it's just not true.
Something that kind of fascinates me is the legalities of packaging up software for Snap or Flatpak, or even more specifically, games. Mm-hmm. Okay, when we're talking about, let's say, a standalone game client that you can install through Lutris or through the Snap Store. If you know, what are the legalities around that? I had a member of my community recently who, I'm not going to call him out just because I don't know how sensitive this topic will end up being. It was really awesome what he did, but he packaged up one of my favorite games as a Snap. And I started wondering, could he get in trouble for that? Could Canonical get in trouble for that?
So we obviously have terms and conditions for the store, and you need to have the legal right to distribute the thing that you're distributing if you're publishing it, right? And if you're publishing your own software, then typically you will have the rights to do that. So that's okay.
Of course, yeah.
And we would prefer that developers publish their own software. But that's not always the case because, Linux is a bit of a niche, and often developers will say, I'm not interested in publishing it over there. You've seen all the problem with, developers pulling their apps their game support for Linux and, citing whatever reasons. But often developers will say, I don't have time for that. It's not financially worthwhile. Mm-hmm. But what they'll often say is, go ahead and do that if you want to. I don't care. Others will say, absolutely no, don't do that. Or will have that written into their legal agreements that say don't do it. And part of the reason they say don't do it is because what if they start getting popular in that store and they start getting support requests from people saying, hey, I installed your game from the Snap Store and it doesn't work. Their support people are then wasting their time dealing with a thing that they don't technically support, that they didn't publish. And so that can be a problem. The thing I would say is do your due diligence and make sure that whatever thing you're publishing, you have the rights to publish. And if you don't, then we reserve the right to remove it. And we have removed some software from the store. We've removed some where we've identified that it definitely shouldn't be there. And we've also had developers contact us and say, please remove this thing because it's, ours and it can't be redistributed.
Okay. Then I suspect there are things on the Snap Store that maybe should not be there.
There is a report app button on the page. Feel free to hit the report app button if you feel something should be reported. We don't want it to get a reputation for having all kinds of dodgy software in it. That's, and anything.
Right. You don't want to be the Pirate Bay of software or something like that.
Exactly.
Right? And this is something that's been on my mind and something that a lot of people have been talking about lately. And that is gaming on Linux. Something near and dear to my heart lately. And I feel like, and this is not a barometer of what is true, but I feel like the chatter that I hear in the community that I'm tapped into, a lot of people are saying, hey, if you're gaming on Linux, Pop OS. Do you have a reaction to that? Do you feel like that is something you're hearing as well?
Well, I hear it because System 76 tell people that. That's
I have told people that also.
You're quoting marketing material directly from System 76 there, I believe. Now,
well, and also from Linus Tech Tips,
right? Who were provided a system by System 76 and given marketing material.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking you this, I shouldn't have hidden that question underneath, but people have expressed an interest in Ubuntu adopting a rolling release model, so that there would be newer drivers, newer software, newer versions of Wine, all of that. Is that something that Canonical has ever entertained? And do you think that would be a positive or a negative for Ubuntu?
So gamers are one facet of computing. They're a very loud and opinionated facet of computing when you compare them to desktop users who just want to open an Office document, right? They are one of the stakeholders in what we make. And so, we listen to that input. And over the years, we have considered doing a rolling release. The last time we seriously considered it was, some years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago was the last time we considered it seriously. And part of the problem is software vendors actually, some of them tie their software releases into our release cadence. They know that there's an LTS coming up. They know that there's a release coming up, and they schedule their releases around our software releases because they want to be available for that version of Ubuntu. I think it's certainly something we need to look into again. I've had a chat over beer with Martin about this multiple times about, do we change from being a 6-monthly cycle to maybe having something where there's an LTS and then you're just rolling in between one LTS and the other, and you're just aiming for the next LTS. And then if you want to, you carry on rolling to the next LTS. But it's difficult because for a long time, we've had these 6-monthly releases and a lot of people rely on those 6-monthly releases. So it's a balancing act, because while this might be good for gamers, it might not be good for a whole raft of other people who rely on using Ubuntu.
Well, and that, from a marketing point of view, I have to imagine that 6-month release cadence also gives Canonical an opportunity to kind of get into the spotlight, right? Every several months, and highlight new features and get their headlines out there. That's in my mind, that's a good thing. And plus, it's just what people have come to expect, right?
Right. But that doesn't mean change is not allowed, or we don't entertain the idea of change. I mean, that's just the status quo, right? But we do change things in order to cater for stuff like gamers. Like we recently made it more easy for the Foundations team to backport newer versions of the NVIDIA driver to LTS releases of Ubuntu. And that benefits anyone who's got an NVIDIA card. Now, I appreciate that some people are not serviced by that driver and use other GPUs from other vendors. And sometimes there's going to be a window in the Ubuntu release cycle where that ISO is no good for you. And I'm sorry about that, but that's just the way it is. We can't shift everything just because AMD have brought out a new GPU. That's not the way the release cycle works. There's too many other moving parts for us to just down tools and say, okay, everybody stop. AMD have a new driver. Everybody stop. Because for the vast majority of users, that doesn't matter.
Do you guys have a line of communication with the AMD Linux team?
All of them. It's just as difficult for us to ask them to move their release as it is for them to ask us. They wouldn't ask us to move our release, just like we can't tell them, could you please change your marketing strategy? However,
please change your release date to April 2020.
Exactly.
Because, we've got this new LTS.
Yeah. But there are some companies where we do align more closely, where there is strategic advantage to both sides, and we certainly do have things that are lined up for 2004 where people have shifted timelines in order to meet that deadline, for sure.
Speaking of 2004, I have to just say that I love the default Yaru look. I've seen a few of your videos, and the clean install just looks so good. It's got that just splash of little, like a purple gray, and it's really nice. But one of my listeners asked, how deeply involved are you guys in the development of?
So the Ubuntu desktop team is a bunch of people who've worked on GNOME for a long time. We work with the upstream GNOME project. We have people on the desktop team who commit patches to upstream GNOME. We're active on their bug tracker. So yeah, we're super active members of the GNOME community, just like all the other stakeholders, like Elementary, like Endless, like Fedora developers. We're all just as active as the others. I know there's this whole meme that Ubuntu doesn't contribute to upstream projects, and it's a thing I've heard 1,000 times for 15 years, and it's still just as wrong as it was 15 years ago. We do contribute. The problem is that people sometimes don't see the contributions that they should see, and feel that we should be contributing in different ways. How dare you do that? You should do this. And the world doesn't work like that. So the desktop team contribute to GNOME. In fact, the packaging of the latest release of GNOME that's been done for Ubuntu was also done for Debian by Canonical. So the packaging of GNOME in Debian was done by us. We contribute to Debian just like anyone else contributes to Debian. I'm not saying that makes us, better than anyone else, but people often think that we just consume from Debian all these packages and rebrand them as Ubuntu, and that's all we do. And that's far from the case. We contribute both to upstream GNOME, but also contribute to upstream Debian, and then we get the benefit of the work we did in Debian, just like everyone else gets the benefit of the work we did in Debian.
I'm so tired of hearing that mentality, that argument that, oh, well, this is just a reskin of Debian. This is just a reskin of Ubuntu. Reskin. It's like, man, I don't know if that's because people are just grumpy, or if because the distributions aren't doing a good enough job really talking about what they're doing to improve the entire ecosystem, what they're doing, what they're sending upstream, Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a mixture of both.
It could well be. I know there are some people out there who just don't like us and don't like the work we do and never will. And there's nothing I can do to change their minds. And that's fine. It's fine to have opinions. I personally don't like BMWs. I'm not going to go around telling everyone who has a BMW
especially not their new logo.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Oh my God. They went into this whole we're going to make a flat design of the BMW logo. It's atrocious. It's atrocious. People were like, okay. You're not putting that on my car. Anyway.
So just to be clear, I have never owned a BMW and I don't intend to own a BMW.
But me neither. I never will.
That doesn't mean that the people who work on it are terrible people, and the people who own them or choose to use it are terrible people. And I feel the same way about Linux. People seem so invested in the distribution other people use and so invested in the distribution other people work on. It's just so negative, and I hate it. Coming back to your point, I think you're right. There is a lack of understanding in the community of what Canonical does. And yes, it's far from just repackaging stuff that's in Debian and pushing it out as Ubuntu. The work that the security team do on making sure that there are security updates for all these CVEs out there, and those go into Ubuntu, into the Ubuntu archive, and then are used by all the derivative distributions like Elementary, like System 76, and all the others and Linux Mint. They're all based off Ubuntu. They're using the work of the Canonical security team and the kernel team and the foundations team, But to everyone outside of this community, they just see it as, well, there's a bunch of packages in the Ubuntu archive. We're just using that. There are people behind those packages. There are people who are creating those packages and working on that stuff all day, every day. And someone's paying them. And it happens to be Canonical that are paying them.
So what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about Canonical? Is it that? Is it what we just talked about, or perhaps something different?
Yeah, I think it's partly, people misunderstand our motives. I think they think we're doing things to subvert the Linux community. Like we're trying to be, in inverted commas, the next Apple or the next Microsoft, or
like
we're
WSL.
trying to. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's always a tough conversation to dance around is, why use Ubuntu if I can use Ubuntu on Windows?
So use it. Use it. You're still using Ubuntu. You're still using the work we've done. So we win anyway. So I think one thing that people don't appreciate is that there are people behind those packages, and there are people behind those emails, and there are people behind those blog posts. And we've all worked in free software for a long time, and we're not indoctrinated into some kind of cult of Ubuntu. It's just that we think Ubuntu does it really well. And if there are things that are wrong with it, we want to fix it just as much as you do. And just like every open source project, there are many more bugs than there are human beings possible to fix all those bugs. But we try and prioritize them. We try and get stuff fixed that is important, that we think is important to users and our customers and our partners. And there's stuff that happens behind the scenes that people don't even know about. Like we have deals with OEMs to ship Ubuntu on those devices. And that means we often do hardware enablement. And so there are upcoming laptops with new audio hardware. I think it uses DMIC, and SoundWine or SoundWire, something like that. I don't know. It's not my area of expertise. And the work that happens in the firmware, the kernel, BlueZ, Pulse, and ALSA all needs to be coordinated in order to get that hardware working on that laptop. And there's teams of engineers who work on getting that hardware working. So when you go and buy a laptop and you stick an Ubuntu CD in, or you stick an Arch CD in, or whatever CD you want, the fact that that works is sometimes because somewhere in Taipei there are engineers working for Canonical who make that work. And I think that's a thing that people just don't realize actually happens. That we do actually work with vendors to make stuff work.
I realized it happened, but not in that specific of a way.
There's an office in Taipei where they have piles and piles of laptops before they're ever released to the public, prototype laptops from all the tier 1 vendors. And we do our best to ensure that the hardware works on Ubuntu on all of them.
You're not talking about OEMs you have deals with, are you?
Well, they don't have any OS on them when we get them, and they're not even out in the shops yet. We get them before they're released.
But they're not intended to be sold with Ubuntu.
They might be.
They might be.
Some are.
You're ensuring that Ubuntu works on them regardless, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Nice. Okay.
So they ship us laptops. We do whatever engineering is required. And one of the features in 2004 is if you put the USB key in to install on one of these brand new laptops, if it's determined that you need a funky kernel that's slightly tweaked for that particular hardware, then the installer detects that and says, hey, I've detected that this machine is supported by this specific kernel that we made. Tick this box and it will go and get that kernel and load that one on. So that it means that newer machines that we've certified will be easier to install on with a stock 2004 key.
Like new Surface laptops where there's that specialized Surface-centric kernel it could go out and... I'm not asking you to say specifically, but it's that kind of functionality, right? Where there's...
So, yeah, I don't know. I couldn't say specifically which ones, but...
That's really fascinating, though.
The goal is that in the future, you could buy a machine that is supported, and we... under the covers, put the right kernel on there to support all the hardware, the funky hardware that's inside that laptop.
I didn't know that either. That's really interesting. That's incredible. All right, Alan, I have one more tough question for you, and that's it. And it's a real doozy.
I didn't think we'd got to the tough questions yet.
Really? Okay. How can you prove that Ubuntu is the most popular Linux distribution?
So I guess this is because, oh man, this is a good question.
Because we do hear that a lot, right? And I think that common sense dictates that, yeah, Ubuntu probably is. But, you know, there's you also see headlines and you see press releases from people like Zoran saying, hey, Zoran OS 15 has hit almost 1 million downloads in 9 months. And I think that's impressive, but I don't have any kind of metric to compare it against.
Yeah, it's difficult because numbers are generally commercially sensitive for any organization. It's different for a one-man band or a tiny Linux distribution that, wants to, talk up where they've got to. They've hit a milestone, we've got 1,000 downloads or we've got 1 million downloads or whatever it is. And they want to talk that up to let people know that people are downloading this thing. What I would say is downloads are a terrible, terrible measure of your popularity. Having seen the web stats for the Ubuntu ISO downloads, they in no way translate to users. There's no correlation between the number of times your ISO is downloaded and the number of people using it.
You know, in the last several months, I have downloaded various versions of Ubuntu probably 10 times. And I'm just one user. So.
Yeah, right. And I've downloaded the ISOs, the non-release ISOs multiple times over the last week to do my videos. It's really difficult. And you can look at third-party things, like you can look at the Steam survey. I wouldn't look at things like the contributions to Proton DB because they're a different class of user. And a lot of them will run Arch or Manjaro or something like that. And I've certainly seen people talking about how something is the top of that list, therefore it's the most popular. It's most popular among that niche of like, it's the parasite on the fly on the back of the dog. Like it's such a tiny subset of the whole entity. If Linux is the dog, I mean, we're probably the flea, in fact. But I don't have a good answer for you because I always try and cite third parties who have good data, and third parties that have good data are things like Steam Survey, Wikimedia, various net surveys, anything which is a popularity contest where you click on things, dismiss out of hand because they can be easily gamed.
For example, DistroWatch.
Don't get me started on DistroWatch.
Oh man, that's an entirely different episode.
Yeah. So the measure for DistroWatch is it's a measure of people clicking on pages, right? It's a measure of people clicking on release pages, news pages, and the individual distro pages. Notice when there's a news article for Elementary on the front page of DistroWatch, you'll notice that it rises up the list, the stats. Is that because Elementary is more users now? Or is it just because they've written an article about it and it links directly to that page in the article? I think it's more likely that Occam's razor is at work here. It's difficult because we get given data by third parties. Like we've, been given access to information by companies who monitor this kind of stuff. And so we know it is. But unfortunately, it's not our data and we can't share it. And that's frustrating. What I can point to is the numbers that other people have published. Some of the other distros have published their user numbers as far as they can track them. Interestingly, PPAs have stats on them. You can actually get stats of how many people are downloading things from PPAs. And some Linux distributions have PPAs enabled by default. And so as a result from that, you can extrapolate roughly how many users a distro has by how many times the PPA is hit when a new release of a package hits that PPA. And so there are some ways to see, with data that's out there, but I don't think there will ever be here's a list of all the distros and here's how many users they have.
Can you point to growth?
One of the metrics that we show every few months at internal company events is the number of people who have certain snaps installed, high profile, that everyone's heard of. A while ago, we would go to an event and talk about the 100K club, the snaps that have hit 100,000 installs. And then it became the 200K club very soon afterwards, and then it becomes the 500K club. And so, yes, there is growth. It's great to see popular applications being used by a lot of people on a regular basis on Linux. So yeah, it is growing. Maybe not as exponentially as, we'd like. Maybe it would be great if, that percentage we see in the Steam survey grew a little bit faster, but it's difficult. It'd
be nice to see that overall, just in terms of Linux gaming. It would be nice to see, instead of those, hey, it went from 0.8 to 0.82 or something. Right.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything that needs to happen to have just a complete sea change in user perception and adoption of desktop Linux? One thing that has to happen for the mind share and the market share to explode.
Okay, do you want the controversial answer?
Whatever answer you want to give me.
Okay, I'll give you the controversial answer. Stop making other distros and only focus on Ubuntu. There's your controversial answer is forget all the other distros.
Okay, here we go.
Only promote Ubuntu. There you go. If you promote all these other distros, all these other niches, then it's very difficult. You paralyze the users with choice. If you give them just one option, just like there is one option for Windows and there's one option for OS X, macOS.
Yes.
Give them one option. That's the contentious one, because I know.
I don't know if I would call it contentious necessarily, but
it would be among people who don't use Ubuntu.
But you know what? If I were to start a desktop Linux alliance, and I were to realize that to get people in the door, you have to show them one attractive thing, then I probably would choose Ubuntu. Why not show people through the door and then let them discover the buffet on their own?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The difficulty is trying to get the Linux community, like you're herding cats, trying to get them all pulling in the same direction. And I think that's why a number of distros are kind of, like you look at Endless, they're pretty much outside of the Linux distro ecosystem. They contribute, they're part of the ecosystem, but they're not seen like many of the other distros because they have a very specific use case and a very specific target audience. And so they do things that are slightly different from everyone else, and they get a free pass on doing that because they're outside our community. And I think because they don't depend upon all of us community advocating for Endless because they've got a marketing budget to do that. I think as there are more distros that are going to start doing that and separate themselves off and say, look, you can carry on doing your advocacy, but we'll do our thing on our own, because trying to get them all working together is like trying to get alert, car analogy coming. It's like trying to get all the motor vehicle manufacturers working together. They just won't. They might do it on things like safety and stuff that's being regulated that they have to do, but you'll never find all the motor vehicle manufacturers making a common platform to build cars upon. It's never going to happen because they all want their own commercial advantage, and the same thing happens for Linux distros as well.
It's such a tough conversation to have, and I get people coming to me all the time. Hey, I saw an article, I heard your podcast, what distribution should I choose? And I started realizing that we have to answer those questions with a bunch more questions.
Right.
Do you want to use something like DaVinci Resolve? Are you a content creator? Are you a coder? Do you like how Windows looks? Do you like how Ubuntu looks? Do you like how there's so many questions because it's so fragmented and there's so much crippling but amazing choice there for people. But I have to sort of reluctantly agree that I think you're right. I think that is the answer. That is, everybody rally behind Ubuntu or X distro, right? Or Fedora, or rally behind one. Pick one, and that's what you recommend. And then you ask them those questions, and once they're in the door and they understand Linux and they understand what they're doing, then they can just kind of discover everything else on their own. And then that should lead to hardware manufacturers shipping laptops with this one distro, and the support's easier to find, community's easier to find. So I mean, it's a tough conversation though.
The problem is the things you've just described, we've already done. We've already got hardware vendors selling machines running Ubuntu. And we've already got the documentation. And
those need to be sold. Like, we need to walk into a Best Buy and Walmart and see an XPS 13 Developer Edition.
That is tricky.
Yeah. Hey, if Ubuntu didn't exist, what distro would you use?
So the distro I used before Ubuntu was Debian.
Okay, that makes sense.
I would probably go back to using Debian if Ubuntu didn't exist, yeah.
All right, we have a few more minutes. I want to talk about your YouTube channel because
okay.
I am kind of falling in love with YouTube lately, and you've been a content machine over there. Are you enjoying it? You just kind of like, hey, it's my lunch break. I'm going to show you what a brand new Ubuntu 2004 install looks like, and it's really compelling, and it's been a lot of engagement there on your comments.
Yeah.
And is it something you're kind of looking at growing, or is this just like the Ubuntu 2004 hype cycle?
It's a bit of both. So I have access to the Ubuntu YouTube channel, and I have access to the Snapcraft Ubuntu channel, and all of my content fits into one of those two buckets. It's either Ubuntu or Snapcraft. I feel I can't really publish the stuff that I'm doing in my lunch hour on either of those two channels. It's not professional enough for the Ubuntu one, and I don't particularly want to go down the road of creating a whole load of like super animated titles and the stuff you've done on your. I'm in awe of the stuff you've done on your channel.
Believe me, you don't.
Of like,
I regret. I kind of regret coming out of the gate with even a little bit of polish, because now you're always trying to one up yourself, try and make it look better, and you're spending 8 hours editing, 4 different quad split screen things together, and oh my gosh, and you sit there and you talk, and it's interesting, and it's it's nice to watch.
So I don't know. Maybe if I get time, I'll do some title slides. Do you know the way I do it is, so the two laptops behind me, one is a ThinkPad X220 and the other is a Entroware Athena. And the Entroware Athena is running OBS and hardware capture card, capturing the output of the ThinkPad X220. So it makes it easy because in OBS, I just press record and it just records whatever's on the screen of the ThinkPad. And so I could just sit and talk into the microphone and just do stuff on the laptop and record that and then hit stop, and I do zero editing. I don't overdub the audio. Yeah, exactly. So that was the whole goal, because I know how painful it is doing the video editing. And the slide is, I take a screenshot of some way through the video, and then I paste that into LibreOffice, and I put a title over the top of it, screenshot that, full screen, and screenshot that, and then I upload that as the thumbnail. That's how I do thumbnails. And it's really low effort, but it's good fun, and I don't want it to be all encompassing because I have a job to do. I can't sit and do all the stuff that's necessary to make a super. I'm never going to be MKBHD or any of those like high-end YouTubers. I know, because this is a super niche thing and it has a very limited audience, and I'm amazed at how many people have subscribed. A significant part of that is thanks to Joe Collins seeing one of my videos, making a video like it, and then linking to mine, and then suddenly I got a jump in people. So
nice.
It's that was a significant help. But yeah, I plan to continue doing this as long as I've got things to say and people want me to do it, and people keep asking questions and saying, how do I do this and how do I do that? So, and I try and keep them short so I could do them in my lunch hour. And just hit record.
I can't believe
and
you knock all that out in a lunch hour. I mean, that's.
Have you seen the quality?
Maybe I need to get back to basics. Maybe I'll get back to basics and just do. Well, you know what I was amazed at is I decided, you know what, I'm going to do a Let's Play. You know those Let's Play videos that were all the rage back in the day, and I'm going to play through like Halo Master Chief. Halo Combat Evolved on Steam Proton, and I'm just going to talk and have fun. And there it was, a 40-minute video that I knocked out in 2 hours with editing and everything. And
wow.
I was like, maybe I need to explore this a little more. But I noticed you're on LBRY as well. What do you think about LBRY? Is it just open-ended question? What do you think about it?
I think it's interesting. I've put my content on there for a couple of reasons. One, to test it out, and one because I made a snap of the client and I wanted to test it and make sure it works. So it's my dog fooding is trying out the client. I'm a little sad that a significant amount of the content on there is stuff I'm just not interested in. It's a lot of crypto nonsense, a lot of Bitcoin stuff that I just don't care about, which is unsurprising given it's a blockchain based platform, right?
Yeah.
But then again, if you think about YouTube, there's a significant amount of YouTube that I don't care about, that I don't want to watch. But the YouTube algorithm only surfaces stuff that I probably do want to watch. Whereas LBRY just shows me everything, and I still see all the stuff that I don't want to watch.
Does it do that even if you have told it topics that you want to follow?
I think I've told it topics I want to follow. So it tells me things in topics, and then there's So you're right. You can filter it a bit better than just showing you everything. You're right.
I think it depends on where you're using it. You know, like if you're using it on the desktop versus on the Android app or something, it's kind of a different presentation, what it shows you. But I have found LBRY really interesting. I wish that there was more engagement there, because their comment system seems to be just non-existent or broken, and there's, no notifications or anything like that. But one really interesting thing that I've discovered there is the tip system, the generosity of the people, even though they're not shouting comments at you and they're just watching and they're leaving a tip. But I've noticed that once I converted the LBC that I have from those tips into, BTC, Bitcoin, and then into like regular fiat currency, right? If I were to take all of that out of my wallet and turn it into real money, I would have more from LBRY tips than what I have made on YouTube since I got monetized, with 20 times the audience and 35 times the views.
Yeah, it's the fact that it's based on like magic internet beans and not proper money is.
What are beans?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Oh, I haven't uploaded that one. I should upload.
Why
that
are
one.
beans?
Yeah. I'm not super into the crypto stuff. It's nice having a little counter that goes up, and it's nice that people feel the generosity to tip a little bit. But yeah, things like the comment system on YouTube Studio, where you can just refresh the page and just bang out a reply to someone really quickly is really helpful. And so the engagement is much higher on YouTube.
It's weird. Until I started doing content on YouTube, I never looked at it as a social platform. A social media platform, but it kind of is in a sense. Yeah, it's
and
really
people come back, and you'll get people who give repeat comments, or refer back to and reply to other people and say, "Oh no, Alan covered that in 3 videos ago" or something. It's great. I love it.
All right, Alan Pope. Last question. What's your favorite Ubuntu release of all time? I don't know who asked this, but it's a great question. Oh, no, it was Eric Londo. Eric Londo of Linux Plus.
Right.
Yeah. What was your favorite Ubuntu release of all time? Not the most performant or modern, but just the one you were most excited about.
Oh, man.
That might be the toughest question.
Yeah, it is. Totally is. Like, obviously, marketing and PR answer is the latest release is obviously the best one. Yeah, 2004 is the best one. Everyone should use that. I think probably 1404. It had Unity that had matured enough that it was robust, stable, performant. It had long-term support. There are still people running 1404 now. Nearly 6 years after it came out, there are people still running 1404. In fact...
And they have another 4 years, don't they? Is that how...
it's 10 years for ESM. Yeah. And did you know... This is a thing that I don't think many people know. If you're running an ESM-supported release of Ubuntu like 1404, I'm not using this as a segue to an advert, but if you're running 1404, you can have ESM, extended support, for free for up to 3 machines. And if you're an Ubuntu contributor, you can have it for free for up to 50 machines.
50, 50.
50, yeah.
50.
Yeah, and you'll get those extended support lifecycle for the additional 5 years if you're an Ubuntu contributor. So I think 1404 would probably be my my favorite. I dug that X220 out of a cupboard a few months ago, and it was still running 1404. And when I booted it up, and I thought, wow, this is fast, and realized that Unity was pretty quick by the end, by the end of its life.
Well, I like to end these conversations by asking how people can get involved with Ubuntu and contribute, because there's obviously plenty of opportunity for that, right? But is there anything specifically right now that you guys are looking for?
Yeah, right now, I'm going to do a video later this week. It may tie in with your release of this podcast. Hopefully, I'll give you a link if it is. Right now, we're getting close to 2004, and so one of the things that needs doing is a focus on translations, because, you know, I'm an English speaker and I have everything set to English, but obviously around the world there are other languages which are just as important, whether it's Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese or French or German or whatever. And we have large communities in those regions that speak those languages. So I think if people can spend some time, if you are multilingual and can do the translations, that would be super helpful, beneficial way that's non-technical. It's not hard to do translations, and it's a really great, easy way to contribute to Ubuntu.
And where do they go to get started with that?
If you go to translate.launchpad.net, I think /Ubuntu should take you to the right place. Or
just ping you on Twitter.
Yeah, or ping me.
Well, I think, I could probably sit here and talk to you all day, but, you know.
Yeah, I have a job.
I know we've got schedules and I have to edit and, you know. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on. It's been, it's been a blast, and we should do it again very soon.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you guys just want to plug?
No, not at all. Just, I'd put a call out to people to think maybe twice before thinking that we're doing everything to be evil. We're actually nice people.
Canonical, we are not evil.
Actually nice people.
Actually nice people. That should be on the website. That's going to do it for episode 30. Thank you once again to Alan Pope for taking a serious chunk out of his day to come and chat with me. I hope you found the value in everything that he had to say. Whether you agree or disagree, I really appreciated how candid he was about some very difficult topics. If you want to see a good chunk of our conversation on video, then you can head over to youtube.com/Linux4Everyone or LBRY.TV/@Linux4Everyone. On the video platforms, I'll be breaking our conversation into some themes, and I think that's also a great way to digest it, and especially to see some toys that Alan has in his office, and just it just seemed more engaging to me actually chatting with him over video, and I think that comes across to the audience as well. Anyway, guys, I'm going to get out of here. I'll see you very soon, and until we chat again, take care, and take care of each other. See ya.
That's the joy of working from home. That's the only reason why I took the job, is so I don't have to shave anymore.
Well, the bottom half of me is pajamas, so...
Oh, you wear clothes on your bottom half.
Yes, I do.
I saw there's a journalist I follow in the UK called Kate Bevan, and she was, a lot of people were tweeting out their tips for remote working, because, you know, a lot of people are suddenly having to remote work. And a lot of people who do this on a regular basis are giving their sagely advice. And hers was, have nighttime pajamas and daytime pajamas, and make sure you get out of your nighttime pajamas into your daytime pajamas when you're working.
Because that'll make you feel more professional.
Yeah, totally. It'll make you realize you're actually at work. You're not in bed anymore. I love it.
Yeah, I love it.
It did actually make sense when I read it. I was like, yeah, and then I thought, no.